Hey guys, welcome to Star Wars Podcast. Today, my good friend Josh from Star Wars on High and I are going to continue our discussion about Star Wars prequels and their duels. Before we do that, Josh, please introduce yourself to our new audience. Tell us where your channel is and what kind of videos you do.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. This is part 3 or 4. We've done a lot of these conversations together. My channel is Star Wars on High. You guys can find me on YouTube, on Twitter. I make really videos about anything on Star Wars. Whatever's coming out, I typically like to talk about it. We do a weekly show, Timeline and I do. On Thursday nights, we do a live stream together as well, where we interact with you guys. So come by, check it out, hang out with us. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Josh and I, very quick intro, the way we discovered each other is that we're very different types of fans. He's a big prequels era fan, and I stumbled across his channel. We started pretty much about the same time. We're like small channels, but I really enjoyed how he was talking about Star Wars in general and things that he liked and didn't dislike. And I said, wow, we could have a very constructive and interesting conversation about it. And that's how we have launched these weekly series. So anyway, in the previous video, you guys could check it out in our podcasts. We started talking about the prequel duels. And we left this one for the last, the grand battles of the episode 3. And I realized, let's dedicate actually a whole podcast to it because there's a lot of stuff to unwrap. And it's a huge film and it's a conclusion to an entire era of Star Wars. And I wanted to hit off with this question because I know how passionate of a fan you are. Josh, what does the episode 3 mean to you personally?
Yeah, and for folks who haven't seen us talk about this before or haven't been to my channel, Revenge of the Sith is my favorite Star Wars movie. Has been for some time. You hit the nail on the head. The end of the era feeling to me is so strong in Revenge of the Sith. The closing of a chapter. At that time, it felt like the last Star Wars movie ever. In that, that was all we were going to get. Is how we all felt, right? So that was the concluding chapter. And growing up with Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, because I was a lot younger when those movies came out, to see the kind of dramatic, sad finale of not just the prequel era, but also segueing us into, the original trilogy, it had such a powerful emotional impact. I remember we talked about this in some of our past podcasts. Yeah. It's one of the first times in a movie, as the young viewer I was, where you didn't get the happy ending. It was the story about the fall of a hero, the fall of characters you'd kind of grown to love. And it was just such a different experience for a young fan that I was. And I still feel that way today. I actually rewatched Revenge of the Sith last week, so it's fresh in my mind. And kind of going through that experience again, it just has that kind of finality to it. Yeah. That hits me, I think, at an emotional level that the other movies just don't. And that's kind of the way I'd intro my feelings about Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, also for me, for somebody who was a little bit harder to accept the prequels, I went in to see episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and actually enjoying it quite a bit, more than the Phantom Menace. I was saying, okay, that's maybe perhaps not the Star Wars that I wanted, but it was quite fun to watch. And I'll be honest with you, when I watched Revenge of the Sith, I still had a little bit of convincing to do, but I said, well, you know what? All things included, this is the one that's closest to that very high benchmark, that the original saga has established. And I had tons of fun with it, but I was also at the same time very conflicted, primarily with its execution. And it's something that I want to talk about today. As we discuss the duels, I also want to talk about the film itself, how it was crafted, what it means, what your personal feelings are, and if you have revised your thoughts in any way from when you were a child to the adult.
Yeah.
And just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, what this movie feels to me, what it felt when I originally saw it in theaters in 2006, is it felt like an end of an era, a fall of the Republic. And honestly, it felt George's biggest attempt to portray this epic war film. Because I think it's staggering the amount of action that we see, both aerial battles and the amount of duels that we have. I think it's the most action-saturated Star Wars film. And interestingly enough, it doesn't just it's not just true for the action alone. That also involves the politics, because oftentimes when you see war film, you see the politics of it, and you see generals with those maps and the arrows pointing to the next duel and so forth. So my next question is, Josh, what makes a duel special within a Star Wars film or in film in general?
It's a good question. For me, the first thing that comes to mind is the stakes, right? What are we fighting for? What is the result of this battle? So we talked about in the last episode in the Phantom Menace with Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan, the Duel of the Fates. What was at stake there, right? We didn't even maybe realize at the time what we were fighting for, but in rewatches you can feel that. And so in Revenge of the Sith, you have duels, I think, that are the stakes are they can't be higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have Palpatine in a brief conflict with a group of Jedi. You have Dooku versus Obi-Wan and Anakin, and then you have the big one. Well, actually, you have Palpatine and Yoda, and then
Mm-hmm.
you have Obi-Wan and Anakin, and all of those duels have incredibly high stakes. If
Mm-hmm.
any of those go one differently, if one of those fights goes differently, the entire trajectory of Star Wars changes. Now, obviously, it's a prequel, so we knew they weren't. But the scale of those is what sticks out to me in what's effective, right? We know
Mm-hmm.
what these consequences are. We know that any mistake here is going to have catastrophic events. We know what those will
Yeah.
be, but I think that sticks out to me is what
Yeah.
makes the best Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
is what's at stake here. Why are we fighting? What is the relationship? I think Obi-Wan and Anakin's the perfect example of the history of the love of the friendship. Those kind of outside influences on a fight, I think, to me, enhance it. The epicness would be kind of the one word summary. What's at stake? What's this
Mm-hmm.
relationship? And I think you see that throughout Star Wars, and they can execute them in very different ways. There can be more subtle, like Vader and Obi-Wan's fight in A
Mm-hmm.
New Hope. That stakes in there are huge, so large you don't even realize it maybe at the time, and it's a very subtle, quick moment. But the history between those characters, what's at stake, I think those things play in really well. And so when I look to Star Wars and I say, what do I want to see in a fight scene? I want to care about the results. I want to care for the characters. I want to care for their history. And I want to be really absorbed on. I think a great example of this is in the Clone Wars, Ahsoka versus Darth Maul. It's a tension-filled fight to me. The stakes, you can feel them. And we know what happens. There's no secrets here. But I think you feel the tension in the fight through the music, through the choreography, through the positioning of the cameras and the cinematography. Those to me are what make the best Star Wars conflicts in general, right? And I think you're on mute. Just a heads up for you. Yeah, there you
Better. Yeah. As I
go.
was listening to your,
I left you speechless.
loving to hear your breakdown. I also had to mute my microphone a little bit because New York background noise. Anyway, we're good to go now. It's you pretty much encompassed all of my thoughts on this. It's really a combination of many things. It's the craft of filmmaking. It's not just choreography, even though
Yeah.
choreography is a part of it. It's not just angles and wide shots. That's also a part of it. It's understanding how the actors are positioned. It's beautiful choreography that stands the test of time because a lot of people find that epic Hollywood costumed films from the 60s looked cheesy. But when you look even within that time period, some of the films like Ben-Hur, for example, is magnificently choreographed film. And as you said, I think one of probably the biggest component is what drives the entire thing home and either makes or breaks the movie is what are the stakes or what is the emotional component of that scene? What leads to it? You could have a film where like El Cid with Charlton Heston, which is like another epic Hollywood medieval film based on a Spanish knight in the medieval ages. And the entire film doesn't have a lot of action, but when it leads to the final duel, you feel that.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
No, like you said, like we've both kind of reiterated so many components. I think
Mm-hmm.
you can maybe try to dumb it down in your head to like it's just got to look cool. But the score, for example, is highly important, right?
Of course, yeah.
So many factors to it, and sometimes you don't even realize what a great scene is until you kind of see it for the first time, and then you can compare it to maybe a lesser experience there.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of duels that I want to kind of like
Yeah,
break down. Hopefully, we'll have time to go over it because once again, the Revenge of the Sith is easily one of the most epic Star Wars films or like sci-fi films in general.
yeah,
It's just so broad in scope. And we actually launched the film with a massive, massive space battle that goes into the first duel. And we see Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin land on the ship, and they're trying, of course, to rescue the Chancellor Palpatine. And this is where they encounter their arch nemesis, Count Dooku. So I want to talk about the duel itself, how it's portrayed on screen, and the story that it carries behind it. Like, what was your response as a kid watching that? How did you absorb it?
Yeah, and we talked about this first fight very briefly in our last podcast. One thing I'll say as just kind of an aside here, because I know I'm going to reference it throughout, is when I watched Revenge of the Sith most recently, I did kind of a cut with the last season of Clone Wars.
Mm-hmm.
So the last 4 episodes kind of tie in. What was really cool about that is, in episode, I think 8 or 9 of the Clone Wars, they reference that Obi-Wan and Anakin have to go try to go to Coruscant to try to, because Grievous is attacking. And the way it kind of cuts from Ahsoka going to Mandalore and then them going into the battle, and then Revenge of the Sith starts right with that space battle, I think is really, really fun and cool context we didn't have when the film first came out. But as far as the actual fight scene goes, first of all, I really like the opening scene in general because it's some of the only real war. Well, I shouldn't say, but it's one of the coolest examples of the Clone Wars I think we get on screen. And it starts off with a real bang. And what you see displayed throughout that first scene is the Obi-Wan Anakin dynamic, that friendship, that, master and apprentice.
Right.
As they fly into the first battle with Dooku, one of the things about Dooku is we both agree is he was a little underutilized in the movies. The show obviously gives him a whole kind of arc that you can follow, but we didn't see a lot of that. He kind of made a subtle appearance in Attack of the Clones in a handful of scenes, gets in a fight, wins handily against Obi-Wan and Anakin, and pretty quickly, because we didn't have the Clone Wars at the time, we get the rematch in the very beginning of Revenge of the Sith. And that scene, as I've watched it recently, I think I like it a little bit. It's hard to not love, I think, Count Dooku just because of the actor portraying him.
Of course.
I love the kind of grandiose he brings and his unique style of sword fighting, or lightsaber dueling, I should say. I love some of the smack talk they have in there, cheesy as it might be. I do like a little bit of and Christopher, the presence on screen, the voice of Dooku. I think anything he says, you're just kind of like, oh man, that's fun.
Yeah.
But the scene itself, I think it was, in the context of the movie, it feels a little bit like, oh, they just lost to this guy, like, because there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
So, you can, the first time you see it, you might be like, oh man, they just lost to it. I think what they're trying to do there, and what they're, is representing the passage of time. Like, oh, Anakin's got longer hair, and now he can handle Dooku almost 1v1, and he does. He eventually wins. And, we see the manipulation of Palpatine begin in that movie.
Yeah.
But as far as fight scenes go, I think it's one of the weaker ones in the movie, just because it's so brief. And I think it's really used as a tool to demonstrate a passage of time and also Anakin's anger and kind of ability to be manipulated.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about the scene as a whole.
That's a good point. And actually, there's one detail that you pointed out just now that I want to counter is that, for me, we all obviously want to see more of things that are good, that makes us feel excited. But I came, as I grew and became more experienced, like watching world cinema, I realized that some of the shorter duels are the sweetest ones because they're so good that it makes you clamor for more. Like the famous, Kenobi versus Darth Maul final battle in the Rebels show was phenomenal. It was quick,
it's brief.
It was to the point, and it's all about the strategy, positioning, and then boom, and it's narratively makes so much sense because it describes who these people were and who they are in that time period as they face each other for the last time. And to talk about the Kenobi, Anakin, and Dooku, the first encounter, that scene to me was undermined by what happens before. When I saw that epic first action scene in the Revenge of the Sith, you see all the ships flying around. It's so saturated with detail on screen. And, for me, again, I was an adult watching it, understanding that what you're looking at is all CG. It sort of took me out of experience, but what took me even more out of experience was the constant banter that Anakin and Kenobi have during a moment which I believed needed to be very, very sobering. It's a very dire situation, and they're making like crack jokes left and right. It's sort of like watching the Force Awakens for the first time. And I remember I needed it to be such a fantastic film. And the moment that in the intro scene where Poe Dameron is put on his knees before Kylo Ren and he starts making jokes, I immediately toned down my expectations because I'm like, it's so out of place. Because there is some humor in The Force Awakens and also in The Revenge of the Sith that is on point. It's enjoyable. Like when little R2 is flying around, he's putting all these droids on fire. I'm like, oh man, this is fun. There's a lot of funny moments there. Yeah. But that was not one of them. And when we land and get to the duel, it's that after effect of what happened before, that emotional, component. And plus, when we start the duel, Count Dooku does that backflip. He lands on the... And it's just such a hard sell because for the remainder of the battle, whenever Count Dooku, Christopher Lee's doing fast movements, there's a CGI face pasted on him. And it was visible then, and it's visible today. But what I did enjoy about the scene was the story that George was telling us. That, look, this is... Obviously, Anakin's fall didn't begin in episode 3. I think a lot of people misinterpret it. It started way, way before... Remember killing the younglings in episode 2? He said, I killed the women and I killed the children. Yes. And here, we're continuing that downfall of the hero. And now this devil is whispering in his ear, kill him, Anakin. Do it. And he has to do it. Is that, if that was fun to watch, I'm like, okay, we're getting into the nitty and gritty of this episode. We're seeing the progression downwards. Anakin is spiraling down. Go ahead if you want to add something.
No, I totally agree. To your point about the downfall of Anakin, it did begin in 2, and not to beat a dead horse here. I think realizing that there was more story to tell, bringing in the animated Clone Wars show, they represent more of that Anakin. There's several arcs in there where you can see how he is prone to being aggressive or prone to letting his fear kind of dominate his jealousy and his rage. So that
challenging authority.
Exactly. Yeah. As far as the banter with Obi-Wan, because you brought up the Obi-Wan Anakin kind of banter coming in, and that does stick out to me in that scene as well. It never bothered me, I think, as much as you, simply because I find both the actors so likable, charismatic, that even when the dialogue might not be the strongest, you can't help but, I think, want to see them together. And I also tend to think, Obi-Wan has a little bit, throughout the movies, especially Revenge of the Sith, a kind of like when a battle starts, like I'm down for this. Like when he fights Grievous later in the movie, kind of a little bit of the kind of the smile and the, like I can't wait. Like they kind of remove some of the weight of the fights by like being bros. Like we're kind of just like bros here.
Yeah.
And I could see doing that with a friend. Like I could see what me and my close friend, like in a serious situation, would be cracking jokes. Now again, was the best writing or maybe the best example of that,
right?
Up for debate. But I think in principle or an idea, it makes sense for those characters. But,
and that's why I love having you and having these discussions, because you always bring like an extra dimension to the stuff. And I do agree with you because, even in a stressful situation, perhaps it's a way, even for a Jedi, because they're human after all, they're not superheroes, to relieve some stress. He has to kind of like get it out there and kind of like poke fun of it a little bit, but we know it's a dire situation.
Well, and there are levels. I think Marvel, for example, who's been extremely successful in their film universe, I feel like oftentimes undermines very dramatic moments at a place. For example, Ultron, Age of Ultron, when he's about to die, he's like, with the benefit of hindsight, and then they blast him off a mountain. It just doesn't make sense to me that a robot supervillain in that moment would be cracking those kind of jokes. So I definitely can appreciate that certain times jokes improperly timed can really, like I'm supposed to feel something here and you're making me feel like wink, wink, this is a movie. So there's always a balance.
Yeah, The Last Jedi and Poe Dameron talking smack to that Imperial, Star Destroyer. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
And you kind of like mentioned a couple of things which I want to move next into.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have the next couple of duels of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus General Grievous and his commando droids. And later on, we see Kenobi confront Grievous on his own. And now these are unique because here you now have live actors interacting with CGI characters. And I wanted to ask also, did you find like a visual dissonance between that and actual live performers, or did you enjoy it?
So I can remember this really well as far as General Grievous is concerned. So when Revenge of the Sith came out, to something we've both said, the hype for the prequels was far greater than the sequels or anything before it.
Yeah.
At my local Walmart, they set up a tent out front of the Walmart, like took up a giant section of parking, like 9 or 10 parking spots, huge rectangle, and filled it with all the Star Wars toys that were coming out. So like I bought like the visual encyclopedia. And I vividly recall buying the Lego of Grievous in his wheel and Obi-Wan on his lizard.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought General Grievous was the coolest looking character when I was younger. He had the 4 arms.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking like, this is the coolest guy. I always was obsessed with the bad guys. I always thought they looked cooler. I had the Jango Fett mask and everything. And, I thought he was going to be the coolest thing. And so I was in love with his weird spider-like, design with the forearm lightsaber duel. And when I was younger, I think that was one of my, you got to remember, I'm talking, 10 or 11. So it's not really a refined opinion.
Right.
That was like one of my favorite scenes the first time I saw it, was just the weird robot cyborg, because he was a unique design. I mean, he really was. For Star Wars especially, he felt like this how are you going to beat him? He's got like these spinny arms, It to me was such a cool character, that seeing Obi-Wan, who it just seemed like there was no way he could beat him, this kind of lone Jedi, to see him kind of out tact and actually pretty handily, I say, beat Grievous, I thought was kind of a cool moment as well. Grievous, I think, ended up being in the movie too brief. I feel like he was kind of introduced, and I think they have kind of laid the groundwork in the Attack of the Clones. He would have been a more exciting duel, because we didn't really have any background to him. Now, again, with the Clone Wars, you see a ton of Grievous, but it didn't exist at the time. So it's kind of like, hey, we just introduced this character. Look at this cool design. Okay, 1 real fight, maybe 1.5 fights. He's gone. That I remember leaving me very disappointed when I was young. I was like, well, he just got here, he just got here. But regardless, I remember thinking, from a young fan perspective, which, as we've talked about, you can't replace how old you were, what was going on at the time. I remember thinking Grievous was like the coolest dude, just for his look, cool skull face, that sticks out.
I'm going to actually echo a little bit what you were saying. I too, when I first saw Grievous in the trailers, I'm like, dude, he's gonna be awesome. He's cool looking design. He's just
he is
awesome to look at. And I remember the first time seeing the Phantom Menace trailer for the first time, it was literally mind blowing. And one of the things that was mind blowing to me were those droids, when you see them like being unpacked and they like rise up in their standing up position and the heads come up. And before we got the Raja Raja thing going on in the actual film, they just looked like these industrial, slick-looking killing machines. And the reason I'm saying all that is that Grievous feels like a 2.0 version of them. Yep. He's obviously a cyborg. There's a human or whatever living creature trapped inside of this robotic body. But he was so slick-looking. But when we get to that first battle, you know what completely sold me on that battle? The moment you see those commando droids and their gowns, which are fully CGI, move. And so with Grievous, I'm like, oh my God, this CGI is insane. Because when we see that fabric simulation, guys, we're talking about 2002. This is almost 20 years ago. And CGI was nowhere near in that level. No. And then this movie brings ILM, with this insane amount of talent. And when you look at this, I believe, I could be mistaken, but if I'm right, those commando droids are actually motion captured, which technology back then was quite different, where they wouldn't directly, copycat actor moves and like record the actual movements in the computer. They would put all these dots and lamps on you, get the reference point, and then the person would go and animate that by hand with the references. But they just moved so fluently and efficiently, and there's such sense of impact that once you see that battle with the commando droids, I said, I'm ready. Give me next. And then we get to the battle with Grievous. You know what's funny? Like, he didn't stand a chance against him. Yeah, okay, these 2 great Jedi, but he's supposed to be the bad boy. You know what I mean? And he's like, bow, out the window. So when we get to the next fight, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is there with Grievous, and pam pam, forearms are extending. I'm like, this dude is not having a
I
chance
know.
versus a single Jedi. It's just no, he's, you know what it was? Like, it was actually cool and fun to watch that fight and realize that, aha, he has lightsabers, but he's not a Jedi.
Yes.
And that's what gives the Kenobi upper hand.
Totally agree. And I did like that as well, where like from a size comparison,
Mm-hmm.
from a scale, he had 4 lightsabers. He's big, he's robotic, and he was handled pretty easily. I mean, and Obi-Wan felt confident to confront him
Yeah.
in an outmatched situation. You're right. I think that shows a very good example between a Jedi, a Sith, and someone who can spin a lightsaber.
Yeah.
And one thing you said, I'll piggyback off of around the CGI. If you watch the Phantom Menace and you watch like the Gungan fight scene or any of the real CGI, and then you compare it to like the opening Revenge of the Sith, General Grievous, I mean, the steps, the leaps that were made in that time frame, the 6, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it was it 9 years? Whatever it was a huge leap, an absolutely massive leap.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that credit to the whole team behind that and embracing that technology that came out, because it's a huge leap from the Gungan battle to the opening scene of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, you know, for the longest time, because even before I was trained as a traditional animator, you know, I used to love to draw all my entire life. And, you know, I always kind of frowned on CGI. And like, oh, you know, well, it's not real. And the reason behind that was not that I wanted to be like this avid hater, is that I didn't quite understand that my eye picks up things that are fake. And this is what they teach you in film school, in animation schools, is that even people who don't watch behind the scenes, they don't even understand what the blue screen and mocap is. They will look at it, and something about the eye automatically tells you that either the lighting is off or the movement is off. And that, to me, for the longest time, was the biggest obstacle to enjoy Revenge of the Sith, because we knew it's entirely blue screen. And for me, as a kid who grew up in the original films, I did not understand that tenacity, that pursuit of completely CGI characters. And I think the biggest offense to me was that even the clones themselves were replaced. Like, why can't you have people in armor suits standing in there? And the reason being is that they didn't move right. And I think my criticism was as valid back then as it is today. It wasn't just hating on it. It's like things didn't look right. You know what I mean?
I do understand. And as a big DC fan, heavily criticized franchise in itself for heavy CGI use from Batman, Superman, Man of Steel.
Yeah.
And I can definitely appreciate that. As I've said in podcasts past, different eras really represent CGI. Like, there's never been a time where there wasn't heavy CGI movies for me. Like, it never existed. And anytime you saw a non-heavy CGI movie, it was what? It was an old movie. So there's always kind of been that connotation. What I do find interesting, and it wasn't intentional, I don't think, but it is something that I've kind of, in my head, I kind of think of it this way. The CGI, the hyper kind of glossy, bright, vibrant look of the prequels versus the really gritty, real look of the old original trilogy, it really fits the two eras, I think, totally accidentally. In the old original trilogy, you have this gritty, darker, it feels like a war-torn, hopeless universe in some of its color palette and scheme that, you know, things have gone bad and the people need a hope, right? People need that to come back. And then when you look at the prequels, it's very hyper glossy and colorful and gold sheen, and everything looks a little artificial, which it is. A lot of it is artificial. It all crumbles, right? So it accidentally actually fits the eras really well. And I don't think I don't think George had any intention of doing that, but it is actually kind of funny to me when you watch them. They kind of match the eras they are, right? So regardless, the thing about the prequels as well, I don't know if they could have been told without a CGI era. I think Coruscant, Mustafar, these epic space battles, you know, I'm not sure they could have ever existed in a world before CGI. Now, I wish they existed in the CGI of like Avatar, or even today's standards, where CGI has become incredible. And go watch Thanos. I mean, it's incredible what they can do. George was always pushing the limits of the technology, and I tip my cap to that, because he gave us, you know, a masterpiece in the original trilogy using the technology he had. And he kind of pioneered this wave as well. So to your point, I think, you know, I wish they'd remake them today with the beautiful CGI technology we have. The Revenge of the Sith, I think, was pretty pretty good for the time, and a lot of it holds up. I mean, it's not perfect,
I think it does. I
but
absolutely agree.
it holds up significantly better than Phantom Menace.
Mustafar looks phenomenal to this
Does
day.
Mustafar does, and I think like General Grievous, I think his eyes, for example, look pretty
Hmm.
good when they do the
Hmm.
close-ups on his eyes, because we're talking
Hmm.
about that character, that snake reptilian like look to him,
Hmm.
kind of glossy and mucusy almost a little bit. I mean, there's some good detail that they attempted to put into those scenes.
Yeah, I think artistically, a Grievous works also because he
Yeah,
doesn't move like a human, so you don't have any point of reference what he would move like.
it's a good
And
point.
that worked. It worked towards to his benefit. And once again, I said my problem with him was never the visuals. My problem
Yeah.
with him was narrative. But visually, I'm telling you, the moment I saw that cape, I'm like, I'm sold. Give me more.
Yeah, for sure. And to conclude the
Mhm.
real point of this, the Grievous Obi-Wan, I think we would tend to agree where it feels like the prequels had a little bit of a habit of introducing a character
Mhm.
and like, okay, he's gone. Like, hey, here's Dooku. Okay, he's dead. Okay, here's Grievous. Okay, he's dead. And so you knew who the real threat was behind the scenes, right? We all knew it was Palpatine. But introducing these Darth Maul in the first in Phantom Menace, but
Yeah.
continuing to introduce these really cool, unique villains and then underutilize them until the Clone Wars comes and saves Count Dooku, saves Grievous, and saves
Yeah.
Darth Maul. It gives all three of those characters significantly better arcs. That was a little bit of a disappointment. And I remember as a young fan, I was kind of like, oh man, Grievous is dead already. I thought he looked so cool.
Yeah.
Like he got shot in the chest and
Yeah.
GG's, that was
Yeah, it's like whenever people say, like, before Star Wars was more planning. No, it's like the story, the creative process is that it's always give and take, and you try out new ideas, you see what works, what doesn't. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, George was influenced by a lot of flashback and negativity surrounding the prequels when they were coming out.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to lead into our next segment here, which is still about that common strife of the episode 3, but a different type of warfare and a different kind of battle. We have a lot of politics in prequels and in episode 3. We have Palpatine versus Senate, so to speak. Palpatine subverts the Republic. There's an ideological war he leads versus the free worlds, and it converts into something that becomes very literal battle for the Senate and those free seats of the free galaxy. I wanted to ask you, how did you perceive that political game, that political warfare, specifically in that episode, and do you feel that it was effectively done?
We've kind of disagreed on this a little bit. I've really enjoyed Palpatine's political maneuvering. I enjoyed that he was kind of a man in quotes who spent a lot of time, a lot of planning, and ended up winning. Because I really like the way in which he won. His tactician of like, okay, I play in both sides, I manipulate everything, but eventually it's the people freely give up their freedom. They eventually, we need to be safe. Here's my freedom. And that to me resonates with exactly what people do in the real world. Oftentimes when there's big times of government overthrow or government control, the people were in a dire way. They were afraid and they voluntarily gave it up. It's often not.
Yeah.
It is definitely possible for a military force to rise and conquer. But the best and most effective way to lead and rule is to make the people think they need you and they want you to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so, eventually in episode 3, when he, and again, the Clone Wars lays a lot of the groundwork for what he was really doing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But when he eventually rises in the end, hey, the Jedi have overrun. I can keep us safe. We need to become this new empire to really to solidify our security and our reign. I really appreciate that that tone to it. I like in that movie a lot. I remember when I was younger, there's a real sense of impending like doom and sadness in the Revenge of the Sith that still sticks out to me whenever we watch it. It's kind of like something's wrong here. Like there's something's not quite right. You see that in Clone Wars season 7, where like Darth Maul's like, hey, we're all getting, there's this sense of things are going really badly, but I can't put my finger on it. And so when the Jedi are talking, it's Mace Windu, I believe, is like Palpatine is like literally somehow outstayed his seat of power like obscenely long amount of time. You're kind of like he's just in broad daylight in the face of everyone finding like legal ways to basically run over everyone, and no one seems to really care. It's not like the public is uprising, the Senate's uprising about it. In fact, they're just giving it to him. They're like, yeah, let's vote on this, give Palpatine more power. I've always really liked that dynamic with the character. And eventually at the end, the line that's a little cheesy, but where Padme says, this is how, whatever republic dies or democracy size, to roaring applause. I do think that's typically how it goes. Yeah. And I really do like the eventual, hey, we're getting controlled by a Sith Lord, but we just kind of gave it over to him and don't even seem to be bothered by it.
Yeah. I liked the fact that there's this political stage in the film, and along that you see the battle theater unfold, and we see the visuals of that too. Because as a Russian, I grew up with a tradition, with a culture of war cinema, because obviously Russia was one of the biggest countries that was influenced by World War II and was the biggest threat who drove the Nazi Germany back to Berlin. And there was a whole culture of watching war films. And for me, as a kid, it was never a question of what a war movie is. I always knew what they are. And oftentimes you would watch a war movie that doesn't have battle scenes. It would talk about the periphery of it. It would talk about how the common folks and the civilians are dealing with it, or the battle lines, or somebody taken hostage. So there's a lot of components to what you could tell in the war movie. It doesn't spell automatically needs to have action. So I did enjoy the war theater of it. What I didn't accept as much was Anakin's perpetual distrust of the council and council distrust of him. I felt that a lot of it was very tacky and very intentionally just moving the plot along because that's where it needs to go. Like, I understood the logic of it, but I just didn't feel that George's pen was his strongest at that point. Because there's a couple of scenes that didn't make it into the final cut. Like, the perfect example is this scene where there's a Bail Organa and there's young Mon Mothma. I'm sure you've seen that deleted scene. And they're sitting there and they're talking about the conversation about the politics. I felt it was such a stronger, mature way of looking at it. Like, hey, look, we need to assemble senators and we need to create some sort of opposition. And you know what I mean? Like, there's little political stuff happening there, but I felt it was so on the nose with everything when Obi-Wan Kenobi is telling Anakin, like, look, I didn't ask you. The council is asking you to. Like, a lot of it felt just juvenile, and honestly, it kind of fits into the narrative that George was defending his prequels at one point, saying that these movies are for kids because the dialogues themselves are very rudimentary. And I was like, in the war scenario, I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
I was just looking over there for a second at the runtime of Revenge of the Sith. I was just Googling it from my memory. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. And it could have been certainly longer. It could have been. It moves at a very quick pace. Again, as someone who just rewatched it, I mean, that movie moves quick. I mean, it's kind of like boom, boom, boom. You're right in the sense that those political scenes do feel very much aimed at kids because they're very on the nose. There's not a lot of subtlety to them. And as the 11-year-old who saw that movie when it came out, it made a lot of sense to me. There's a truth there to what George says, where you can kind of explain away a lot of bad decisions by saying, well, it's aimed for kids. Pixar puts out some bangers that are made for kids that are very deep and mature and smart. So you can't use that as a crutch. But as the kid who did see it, I understood completely what was going on. I understood why Anakin switched. I understood what Palpatine was doing. I'm not sure I would have appreciated it, the subtlety of it, as much as
a younger fan.
Exactly. Here's how I think about it. Like, do you know this is a weird segue, but like the Bourne movies with like Jason Bourne with Matt Damon. Those movies came out, a long time ago. I remember when I was young, I thought those movies were so complicated, so confusing, so weird. Now as an adult, if I rewatch those movies, I'm like, oh, these aren't really that confusing, because a lot of it, as a young viewer, didn't have any experience with it, understanding of the international espionage they're trying to address. So sometimes as a kid, your level of movie watching isn't as high as you might give some kids credit for, right? So sometimes you do have to spell it out. I'm not saying that's an excuse, and could he have done it maybe a little better? I'm sure. But I do think it was effective, at least to this kid who saw it. So there's kind of like a personal anecdote of like, hey, it was on the nose, but I got the point when I was seeing it.
And that's the beauty of it. It's two people coming at it from a different angle, and it illustrates like nothing else, two people talking that, look, if something is not for you, it doesn't mean it's bad for everyone. Other people will come into it and say, well, I didn't see what you see here. That's why I enjoyed it. Before I lead us into the grand battle, the grand finale of this film, I want to talk briefly about Anakin's fall. Did you feel like his story is effectively conveys the transformation from a hero, because he's still a hero in the middle of that film, to a transformation to a complete monster? Or did you feel that the plot just briskly needed to move along the story? Because again, we're at 2 hours and change, and we need to wrap up the story.
Yeah, they moved a little quickly on, I would say, one major aspect of Anakin's transformation. I think it was the often memed, much mocked killing of the younglings. That was the one scene, even on rewatch, that felt like a little bit of a jump. Now, I can explain it, of course, I'd be like, well, this is what the dark side does. This is what fear does. I mean, what they do, I think, do a good job of, well, maybe not a good job, but what I clearly understand is he goes and tells Mace, hey, Palpatine, Sith Lord, I'm doing the right thing here. I want to tell you. He says, hey, go back to the council room. We'll go take care of this. You're going to earn my trust by doing this. I appreciate you coming in and letting me know this information. He goes back to the council where you have the sunset scene where you have him and Padme looking, across Coruscant to each other. Really like the score in that moment, just an aside.
That was a beautiful scene.
It is. And fear wins. Anakin is worried. He's scared. And he's like, okay, Palpatine has successfully given me this hope that I can save Padme with knowledge. He's not even that interested in Palpatine. Like, they had a relationship as kind of a mentor. We saw it in the Clone Wars as well. But his real concern at that moment, at least when I was, watching, is I got to save Padme. And this is the only guy who can tell me how to do it. I can't let them kill him. So he leaves and heads to, Palpatine's room. Now, the whole battle there conducts and etc. And in the whole time, he's not telling Palpatine like, wait, he's not telling Mace, hey, Palpatine's a good guy. Don't kill him. He's just like, please don't kill him. I need him. Like, you can arrest him. You can prosecute him. But like, he's got information I need to get. Like, that's where his hope is. And when he makes a decision to cut off, Mace's arm to save Palpatine, what kind of happens with Anakin, it's like that sunken cost fallacy. It's that point of no return where it's like, okay, I have just done something I cannot undo. I can't go back. I have to keep pushing forward. So I think that whole journey is successful. I think I can feel it and I understand what's going on. I think it's a little sudden to maybe not even raid the temple. I could see him trying to round up the Jedi. Like, I'm going to arrest the Jedi, or I'm going to tell them to surrender to us, and the Jedi say no, and then he has to kill them in an equal combat. That doesn't bother me. The killing of the innocent youth does not strike me as quite. He's not that point yet. Yeah. Is the only scene that I won't really defend there. And again, this is what the dark side does. It warps your mind. Fear overruns you. All of that. I understand
Yoda
that.
says that the path to the dark side is easy. It's quick.
It is. And so I understand you can explain it. I could give you an explanation. For me personally, it is not the most effective of what I actually thought was an effective runway of his fall. He's afraid. He's scared. He's not doing it because he's this bad guy who hates everyone. The Jedi treated him kind of poorly. He's had these weight of expectations his whole life. He was a slave. His mother was killed. He's afraid of feeling that again. He loves Padme, and fear causes him to make a mistake. And I'm on board until I think that one little scene. I think you cut that scene out of him killing innocents. I don't think it actually changes the movie in any way for the negative. That's just how I feel. I wouldn't even mind if they had more scenes of him confronting adult Jedi, like, hey, surrender. The Jedi are trying to overthrow Palpatine and they say no, and then they fight and he kills them. That I'm on board with. I'm fine with that because it continues your spiral. Once you make one mistake, you feel like, okay, I got to make another mistake to make up for it. You make more and more and more, and then you're so deep in the hole of evil and dark. But just to kind of go right from like 30 minutes ago, I felt guilty about cutting off Mace Windu's arm to like, come on, kids, I'm killing you. That's the one scene. And as a huge prequel fan, and I think the Clone Wars helps elaborate on his downfall. I think that one scene is the only one I can't really make a great defensive. But I said a lot there. Yeah. Let me toss it over to you.
No, it's interesting actually to hear how you're breaking down. There's a couple of things I do agree with. First, I always found it problematic that Anakin's catalyst in that specific movie, the catalyst to turn over to the dark side, was just his notions of what could happen to Padme, even though there was no signal of it or foresight of like she's ill or something. I felt that there was needed to be a more mounting tension of things actually happening. What if she perhaps was ill and he just didn't know the nature of her illness? Yeah. Why couldn't we have that to kind of like drive it home and reiterate the point that he's lost his mom as a young man? He is traumatized. I felt that the movie could have spent a little bit less time from the battlefield, because earlier I mentioned that war film doesn't necessarily spell action-packed. Perhaps if we spent a little bit more time cooking this character and giving us a lot of these, the reasoning behind what he's doing, I felt there was never enough. Every time I watch it today, I still feel there is not enough. And when it comes, for example, to the scene with the younglings in the temple that you mentioned, I was kind of like brainstorming and thinking about the Clone Wars, because the Attack of the Clones second film, because you and I have discussed it. When Anakin goes in and has his first brush with the darkness and he kills all the Sand People, the Tuskens, when that movie came out, there is, to my knowledge, no portrayal of Tuskens as people. They're not humanized. Exactly. They're these creatures. They are intimidating. They're scary. They're nomads, and they're not good guys. They're not your friends. Yeah. So it brought the drama to the moment when Anakin says, I actually like that line where he said, I killed the women and I killed the children. It kind of like, ooh, a second. But it's not unbelievable that Padme doesn't respond to like complete shock and like, oh my God, what did you do? She's like, well, okay, these people are bad. They're terrorizing the law. Yeah. Exactly. They're monsters.
Ugly, make nasty noises. They're not humanized at all. Agreed.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah, but when we get to this temple here, Anakin's trajectory, his ideology, his point of view, his the entire what hero needs in the context of the story, because every character needs something, right, to be effective. He needs to save Padme. He doesn't need to overthrow the Republic. He doesn't need to become a Sith. He needs the information to save his wife. How does that fit into coming in and killing these absolutely innocent younglings? I just didn't understand that. And I didn't understand that his fear alone of, I need this information, would make him completely turn on all those Jedi. Like, for example, even the scene-wise, forget about the narrative aspect of the film. When he chops the arm of Mace Windu and he's tossed out the window, there's no moments where he sits down, he regrets it, and he plays this like, no, I'm not going to join you still. Because you actually bring in a very, very interesting point, which I didn't think about before. What if we had scenes where, even beyond that point, where Anakin kind of secreted and hidden that information that he was the one responsible for Mace Windu's death. Yeah. And he has to live with that consequence throughout the rest of the 3-hour or so film. And then we get to a point where the Jedi are being rounded by these clones now. Yeah. And Anakin is like, hey, look, I'm trying to help you guys over here. Come in, surrender, and join this new order and become whatever.
Exactly.
Right? It would have been such a more effective use of his character, and also give us more time to believe that he's coming and he's switching sides now slowly. That Palpatine is corrupting him bit by bit, eating away at his soul.
Exactly, and every bad decision you make makes you more entrenched. So
exactly.
The first time he tries to round up the Jedi, and they're like, no, what are you talking about? He fights, he kills one. It's like, well, shoot, now I'm having an even harder time turning back. Yeah. So you got to keep going. I think 2 little changes would make it a little more effective. First of all, I think the clones should have killed the kids. I think it would have shown I think it would have shown like, A, there was already a gut punch watching the clones gun everyone down. Mm-hmm. But I think B, it kind of would show how brainwashed they were, controlled the clones were. B, I think it helps. With keeping Anakin's downfall a little more slow paced. Like I keep making these smaller mistakes, because it felt, I think, to everyone a little bit of a jump of like, oh, what have I done? He literally says that, after he cuts off, Mace Windu's arm, he gets chunked out the window, and he's like, what have I done? And it's like 30 minutes later, he's like, yeah, hey, Padme, I know you're pregnant right now. I'm going to go kill some kids. I think that's the one scene like that. I have no problem with him killing other trained Jedis, knights, Padawans. That doesn't That doesn't shake me at all because
Yeah.
it's war. I mean, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think it is a little bit of a jump for someone who himself was like a slave child.
Yeah.
That's the one. So I think a simple change you make is you have the clones walk into the room and they're like, "Oh, the clones are here to save us," you know, and then it's like it cuts away. That would have been really like, "Oh, geesh," you know. It already
like
was an
that.
"oh, geesh" moment, but that's an easy change. That's like one shot different, right? Because I like to think of movies in subtle changes because it's easy to be like, "Oh, well, you know, we could redo the whole movie," but
You need a build up.
right, what could I do? Change like a couple things. We'll have the clones do that. And I think your point, it is an interesting idea that like, what if Palpatine didn't like immediately implement Order 66? Like, what if he had more of a subtle, like, hey, the Jedi attacked me. It's more of a Jedi surrender, or I'm going to kill all of you. In the end, he'd kill them all anyway because he's Palpatine, and that's the right thing to do for an evil Sith Lord. But it moved quick. I think that's the one argument I'll concede about the prequel era, which I love. It's still my favorite. Nothing I say here changes that. And this is why the Clone Wars exists, is because the ambition, the ideas I think that George had and then continued to make as the movies went along were not 2.5 hour long movies were not enough. They were just not enough. He wanted to tell so many stories. He wanted to give us this huge payoff of the fall of our hero. And it took 3 movies and an additional 7 seasons of 20 episodes.
Yeah.
And it took books like Master and Apprentice. If you take the prequel era as a whole with the movies, with the Clone Wars, with the books, you have a really ambitious, fun, watchable era. The
Fantastic era. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it.
When you see the whole picture, I think what George ran into, whether that was, you know, studio considerations or his own worries, is you told a really amazing story. It's a beautiful story. I think one of the most interesting of the stories, if you just look at the eras as a whole.
Yeah.
The arc of the Clone Wars is amazing, fun, sci-fi, emotional, fall of the hero, fall of hope.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful tale. And when you take it as a whole with the Clone Wars of the books, masterful. If you just see 3 movies at 2.5 hours, it's like, well, this kid was 10 in the first movie. Now he's like dating Padme in the second. And in the third movie, he's killing Dooku in like 5 minutes and he's killing kids by the end. It all feels so fast. And I think it was more than a trilogy worth. And I think you can sum up, because look, I love, it's very easy to say I love something that's not perfect. I love the prequels. I don't care that they're not perfect. I still love them.
Yeah.
But they could have done better. And I think they helped correct their mistakes by giving us the Clone Wars. Long segue there, but I think you get my point. The fall of Anakin and any of this era's issues with the prequels can pretty much be summed up in like, well, we had to get this done in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it's hard to make Anakin like Darth Vader in 2 hours. One thing they could have maybe done in the movie is not had him be full Darth Vader by the end.
Yeah. 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 It didn't need to tie all the loose ends, which
exactly.
Hopefully
he puts the bow on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that it felt a little bit rushed at the end, but you say it beautifully. The way that you just expressed it, like taking your time, just sweetly talking about the prequel era and the clone era. A fantastic way of looking at it. It's we can all look at these films, find the flaws. One person like it more than the other, and then if others like myself, you know, you have an open heart, you generally invested in this franchise, and you could go and experience this story from the point of view of an animated show, the books, the comics, and still have a great time. Because you know what, at one point, George, it was briefly mentioned somewhere that he had an idea for 4 trilogies, not 2, not 3.
Yeah.
And, you know, it also kind of like spills into the conversation with sequel haters where, well, before there was all this planning and he thought it through and he had all the, you know, synopses and description of all the trilogies he was going to make. No, you could see it in the prequels that this is what the artist does. Let's put aside the fact of how these films were made, were they effective or not, but there's a lot of things that are experimental. There's a lot of ideas that he's toying around with. There's a lot of things that he's retconning, like Jar Jar Binks, which obviously much less in the film 2 and 3. He's adapting as a filmmaker. Unfortunately, he's reacting to a lot of criticism. And I specifically see that at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where he's basically saying with the last 12 minutes of that film, it's done, wrap it up, done. I don't want to ever shoot these films anymore. Screw the fans. Because things are just like, pam, 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 Padme dies. Anakin, Luke, and Leia are being like sent to their respective homes. Things happen. Yoda flees. Blah blah blah. He's closing all these things visually, which I felt didn't need to be there. That the audience is smart enough to deduct that this villain that we see on screen, who has been just scarred and traumatized and burnt, to a crisp, that he will eventually become Darth Vader. We didn't need to see his, costume and younger version of creepy looking General Tarkin, Admiral Tarkin standing by his side. So he sort of rushed things.
A cool way to end that movie would have been, and we're sitting here talking as people who've never made anything in our lives. So I want to preface that, and we don't think we're experts.
Yeah. I have a script I have been working on. Yeah.
All right. One thing, less is more sometimes. Let me give you an example. End of Civil War. I'm gonna use Marvel as another example. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but in the end of Civil War,
I have.
I know I should know that we talked about it recently. End of Civil War. You got your epic fight between Iron Man, Winter Soldier, Captain America. In the end, Iron Man, after basically losing, is like, that shield isn't yours, it's my father's, right? And Captain America drops the shield and walks, and it fades to white. End the movie there. Let the audience think more. Instead, we fade back in. We have Stan Lee make a Tony Stank joke. We have a nice text between Captain America and Iron Man. We're like, hey, they're still buddies, don't worry. And that has always irked me about that movie. It's like, no, I don't need you to tell me it's okay. Yeah. You can tell me the next movie. We know it's okay. So one thing they could have done in a similar fashion with Revenge of the Sith is like, maybe it just ends with the mask being lowered on to Anakin, and then you hear the breathing, cut to black, it's over, right? Because it does it. You could have probably used those 10 minutes earlier in the movie to help us get to that point. Maybe we flash to Padme dying at the hospital and to Anakin on his table. She fades out dying. He fades with the mask on, and you're like, oh my gosh. But directors have a habit of being like, it's okay. So here's Luke, here's Leia, here's the swelling theme at the end, at the end. And it's like, okay, it's like Tatooine, we're happy again. It's like, no, break my heart. Let me sit there on it. I think so many directors, it's, and I understand why, because these movies are made for kids. And I like my heart broken in movies. There's a lot of people out there who don't. I know a lot of fans who are like, that movie made me sad. I don't want to see that again. Like The Joker is a good example. Like that movie you don't feel good watching that movie. You don't feel like, oh, that's a good story.
Water film.
Yeah. You feel like, oh gosh, like you leave the theater like, wow, I feel a little messed up. That I like that feeling when I see a movie. So I think one thing you could do in Revenge of the Sith to improve is, like you said, maybe I don't need to see Luke and, hey, Qui-Gon's back. And okay, it's like, okay, well, that's a lot here in the last 5 minutes. Put that a little earlier, help with Anakin's downfall a little bit. Yeah. Have him, put that mask down, put Padme dying or whatever, cut to black, unhappy, miserable. I think they do a little bit of a rush at the end to be like, hey, everything's okay. We know where they end up. We'll see them in, episode 4. We know where these characters end up. It would have helped the Kenobi show, by the way. Had they have done that, the Kenobi show would have a lot more to tell you. But he didn't know that in advance. But anyway, to your point, I think, Revenge of the Sith, with all the prequels, they need a little more time. They need a little more time.
2 quick thoughts. One is, I found one of the most effective ending shots in film history of what I've seen was the Inception.
Oh, yes, totally agree.
He puts that totem, right? He puts the totem, and the moment that it happened, I'm watching it in theater with all my friends. I'm like, please cut there. Yeah. Please cut. Don't let it drop. And dude, it takes a second there, like, and then cut. I'm like, you should have seen the reaction. I saw it in IMAX in New York on 42nd Street. You should have seen the reaction. And the second quick thought is, what if Anakin donned that Vader suit by the middle of Revenge of the Sith, and we led into the Jedi Purge without him killing off all of them? Because according to the EU, the Legends books, the killing off and prosecution of the Jedi happens into Luke Skywalker's youth. By the time he gets to Yoda and he says, you will be the last of the Jedi, only then you can say that, okay, at that particular moment, all the Jedi are gone.
Well, trilogies are so confining. They really are. Like you have to follow a 3, I think this happened in the sequel trilogy. Like, you could have done probably 2 more movies after The Last Jedi. Yeah. right? Introduce, you could have had Kylo on the run. Star Wars is, because of the first, which the original trilogy is, I think, the only one that really fits a trilogy. That story fits a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most narrow in scope, the most focused in scope, and
Agreed.
the most we're focusing on these characters through this little passage. It's not that grand. I mean, it is grand, but you really don't stray too far off to this character, that character, this character.
You concentrate on the characters.
Right. So in the prequels and the sequels, you go wider. You go much wider. You have a wider story to tell, partially because the technology and the budgets you have with these movies. Yeah. You can. And the filmmakers and the writers get excited. We got to explore this. I think one thing that would have helped the prequels and the sequels was like, okay, we could do 4 movies. We could do 4 movies, or we could do 3 hours for these movies instead. People will see 3-hour movies, guys. Ask the Lord of the Rings trilogy. People will sit through those long movies. So yes, I totally agree that I, as a huge fan of Revenge of the Sith, still my favorite movie. Watched it on Sunday. Still love it. Still, when Anakin's Dark Deeds play, I don't know, that's the song name from that score. Mm-hmm. I love that whole piece of music as they play. Just really powerful stuff. Still makes me feel the most sadness when it ends. You're like, oh man, like that is so sad. I wanted Padme and him to make it. I loved some of these Jedi. I loved Obi-Wan and Anakin's friendship. I wanted to see them more, and I knew it was going to happen, but it punches. But they could have done some subtle things to make it more effective.
Let's jump in our epicness now. I hope we have about 15-20 minutes to go. How are you doing on time?
I'm doing good.
Oh, perfect. All right. I know this is your favorite for me. That's the reason I wanted to delve deep into it. Before we get to the big bang battles, I want to quickly talk about the rest of the Palpatine scene. And I want to talk about it in a slightly different manner from the way that we broke down the previous battles. I want to nerd out here. I want to be like DC versus Marvel comic book fans, just like superficially looking at it on the surface of actually what we saw. How did you feel about Palpatine's physical prowess and the fact that he went up versus 4 Jedi, whipping that lightsaber and jumping straight into combat?
Yeah, it's the worst, in my opinion, of a lot of the fight scenes. I watched the behind the scenes this week actually about Palpatine and Revenge of the Sith, and they literally talked. Mace, Ian, and George all talked in their little interviews that he did not like using a lightsaber on screen. He did not like. He was slower, and so they had and he didn't enjoy it. And I think that comes across where it's kind of cut. He's here. He cuts this dude in half. He's over there. He's like. Watch Palpatine fight Savage and Darth Maul in the Clone Wars. You're like, what the heck? That dude is next level. That dude is tearing people up. He's a lot more thin and gaunt, and he's got these 2 blades, and he's got this almost like a ghoul. He's kind of like this dark, I think that fit that character a lot better, where it's oh, this dude's like a wraith, like a ghost character with these gnarly arms, these lightsabers, using lightning. Wow, that's cool. This movie was kind of he jumps up and they get cut in half. It's well, that didn't feel, especially when you see the final fight scene that follows after of Anakin Obi-Wan with great choreography and a real duel, and what you saw in the earlier ones, it was kind of I almost wish he didn't pull out the lightsaber. I wish his force powers were so powerful that he took out 3 of them just with some forced maneuvers or whatever. I think that would be better. It's my least favorite. I have Palpatine's lightsaber right behind me. That's what that is. So you are talking to someone who still loves Palpatine. I just think that scene was kind of those 4 Jedi they're trying to make Palpatine look strong. So he takes out 3 of them with no problem, but they just died so quickly that it was really For me to think you're cool, I have to think that you can take out really skilled people. And instead of making you look powerful, they made the arresting Jedi look very weak. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a difference there. That's a good point.
There's a difference. To make someone look cool, you can either raise the level of their, John Wick does it a lot, where the other people actually are giving him a run for his money. He murders a million grunts, but there's the one guy where they have a really long, drawn out fight. Well, that tells me how good John Wick is. If he's killing security guards at the mall, you're not okay. It matters. You have to make the competition look equal. So when he kills Kit Fisto and the other 2, just like that, boom, 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 and they just kind of stand there. It's well, the way it was shot, the way it was edited, you don't look powerful. They look terrible. You know what I mean? That's what it looked like.
That's interesting.
That's how I feel about it. And I watched it recently, so I can say this definitively.
Yeah.
It's I wish sometimes with Palpatine they would have leaned more into like I'm like a dark wizard, right? I'm a dark wizard. I'm like, come at me like dead out the window. Like if they would have walked in and he just like chunks one right out the window or something, or melts him, or I don't know, does some cool dark side abilities, because they don't really show us a lot. I mean, my one complaint about George Lucas in the 6 movies is like, they hint at some dark side abilities. Yeah. They show us force lightning. They show us force choke, and that's it. Like, is there some other, like they talk about, like the Night Sisters bring in like this whole like dark side magic. Like there obviously are things they can do. Like Palpatine's wearing some sort of mask to hide his, being deformed. Whatever it is. Like, can we do something cool? Because like, why am I joining the dark side? I mean, force lightning's awesome. Everyone loves, and force choke. We all love it, but I don't know. I feel like let's just show him as a wizard. Like they come in and he's like, oh my gosh, out the window, right? Take someone right out the window. Something like, oh my gosh, his knowledge and power of the Force is so powerful. Lightsabers don't even scare him. He's not, because I always, when he fights Savage and Darth Maul with his lightsabers, I always view that scene as like, I am such an alpha. Like, I'm going to fight on your terms. You're these big, brawly guys who aren't very good in the Force, especially Savage. You got these dual lightsabers. You got the dark saber. I'm going to take 2 lightsabers out and just smoke you guys, just absolutely obliterate you, and then humiliate force lightning you at the end. Like that's how the dark side fights. Like they fight dirty. They fight like for power. So I was always down with that. And again, it's animated, so you can make him look really cool and everything. Yeah. I think against the Jedi, I wish he just would have like turned around, like lifted a finger and chunked one right out the window or something. Kind of like, you think I'm afraid of you? Like, I'm a Sith Lord for hundreds of years or whatever, of my plan. And you think like little blades scare me? Like, I have a blade too. I'll fight Mace Windu. I see if he just would have fought Mace Windu 1v1, which he ends up doing, because Mace Windu is supposedly, we're told, one of the best duelists.
Yeah, the Vapod creator. Yeah,
he's like the best. He's elite, and he's he almost gets a little dark in his lightsaber. So if he would have been like, "Hey Mace, I'm going to fight you on your terms," if he literally would have walked in, kind of like Yoda walks in and takes the guards, it's just like and knocks them both out, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, Yoda is so strong." Like, why not just like totally eliminate the other arresting Jedi using your mind, and then okay, Mace, now because I'm such an alpha, I'm so arrogant, I'm the dark side user. Let's do a 1v1. Pull out the 2 lightsabers or whatever and go for it. Instead, he kind of just like does his spin, which is kind of goofy because he yells like, Rah! It's like, okay, well, I get it. Palpatine's weird because he's all dark and twisted, so I get it. But I just think you could have done a lot cooler. And this is one of the reasons, the last thing I'll say, this is one of the reasons in the sequels, which, I have many complaints with, when Palpatine is just like, hey, check out this force lightning, and he like evaporates the sky. Yes, I wish so badly he would have eliminated those ships. If those ships would have just exploded, I think it would have been so much cooler. But I loved that scene because it was like, yeah, finally, we can do something a little like unique here. We're like so entrenched in the dark side, so absorbed and obsessed with it. Like, let me see that power. I want to see this unlimited power, And so I wish they would have demonstrated like force lightning is never really used effectively in the movies. Like every time it's countered or it like, hits Darth Vader and everything. But like, let's see Prime Palpatine like eviscerate some Jedi using force lightning. Why is this move even any cool? Like, it seems like you can just block it doing this or just with a lightsaber. So let me just like, boom. So I said a lot there, but I think you get my point.
No, dude, I enjoy, like favorite. I said, this is your show by definition. It's your favorite Star Wars film, and I really, really, really enjoy a lot of points that you're making, because without me even talking, like you're saying things that I, as an adult, was enjoying and didn't like you're pointing a lot of these things. It is so enjoyable to talk to somebody who recognizes what these films are and embraces the best about them, while can still talk about the things that are the shortcomings without being negative. Anyway, when it comes to that scene, for me, it didn't work because as a kid, like, it didn't jive with me that I ever saw a younger version of Palpatine.
Yeah.
Like the way that you see him in Return of the Jedi, he's this, as you said, a wizard. He's this old, mystical, ancient, and the power that he has is here. He's the cerebral one. He's the one that puts people on their knees with his conniving and with his intelligence and with the Force powers. And I absolutely agree with you. If those 4 Jedi came in strong, like, hey, we're here to arrest you, he's like, who the heck are you?
Exactly.
A different kind of power. Just lifted them in the air. It just broke
through
their
the
bones.
building.
right?
Take him right to the roof.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
It would have spoken more to his authority as a dark side user. Like, oh my god.
Or force choke 3 of them.
Yeah, like I was saying, like lift them in the air, disarm them of their lightsabers, like twist their necks and drop them on the floor, and you would be like, "Holy crap, this dude is not to be trifled with."
Yeah.
But when it comes to Mace Windu, I was enjoying the fact that at the very least, the Jedi are given some cred. They're given some street cred, and we're dealing with one Jedi who we can trust until the very end of the battle that he's taking that ass down. Yeah. And he did. He's like, pom, pom, no, you're not going to win. I'm younger, I'm stronger, and I created Vapad, the dark side technique that the Jedi could actually employ. So for me, it just technically didn't work. And later on, when I started getting into the EU, and you learn about who these people on screen are, I'm like, my man, you have Kit Fisto walk into that room and nobody's coming out of there alive. I'm sorry. He's not. He's just the way that Kit Fisto is developed. Of course, obviously much later. He's just too much of a boss. And I didn't like that physicality. It's just like you said, it just looked goofy when an older gentleman is doing backflips. Because I always believed that the way that the Force is used in Star Wars, sequels, prequels, and the original films, is that what makes Force interesting is that it doesn't make its users superhuman. When Obi-Wan Kenobi confronts Vader in Episode 4, you could argue that, oh, okay, technology, choreography was there, blah, blah, blah. You know, they just didn't do a good job of it. Yeah. But you also see in that choreography how they worked with the things available to them and how they actually made Alec Guinness use the sword as a light rod. It doesn't have any gravity. It doesn't have any swirling motions. He's treating this weapon as a samurai. It's like one strike and you're done. So it just didn't work for me technically. Anyway, enough with the Mace Windu, enough with the Jedi, enough with the Grievous. Let's get to the juice. Let's get to the what makes Episode 3 arguably, for the fans, my opinion aside, one of the greatest Star Wars films ever made. And it's a duel which is a parallel action. For those who don't know, in film, when you have two separate scenes occurring at the same time and telling you some kind of a story, that's called parallel action. And that's what we have in Revenge of the Sith. We have Yoda confront the Emperor twofold. He confronts him physically with lightsabers, and he confronts him with his Jedi powers. And then we have, on the second side of it, we have Anakin and we have Kenobi. Walk me through it. What did you experience as a kid? What I'm interested to know in first, and you can elaborate as much as you want, is not your later analyses, it's not your intellectualizing what you saw, but as a kid, what was your reaction?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's the best scene in Star Wars when you're young. I mean, the whole act, the Yoda versus Palpatine, the Obi-Wan versus Anakin, it's the best. And you know, you and I on Thursday and on Sunday on my channel, I did a Star Wars movie quiz where you kind of rank your favorite Star Wars movies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people put theirs in the comments, and a lot of folks let me know. Revenge of the Sith was almost always in the top 5, top 3, for a lot of my fans, top 3. Mm-hmm. And I think, none of the other prequels got the same kind of universal love. And I think a lot of it is to do with this whole section because it was so cool. It was an awesome scene to see. I think it was a better fight scene for Yoda than his Dooku matchup. I thought this one was a little more appropriate for his kind of style, even though it had some of the same techniques. And I thought Obi-Wan and Anakin, their long duel through Mustafar is kind of like the coolest thing. I just remember absolutely in love with the way that you saw, because you really liked Obi-Wan and Anakin when you were, you liked both. And it was kind of sad seeing them fight. It was amazing seeing the way that they designed that scene. I mean, it was so big and long, and you're jumping here and jumping there, and lava's squirting up. And it was like the coolest. I mean, it just was the coolest thing. And as an adult, I like it for totally different reasons. But watching it, it was just like, this is cool. It was the coolest lightsaber fight you saw, I think, in all the Star Wars to this day. I mean, you hadn't, I think, been rewarded as a young fan. A lot of the time, you showed up to that theater to see lightsaber battles. Call it what it is.
Yeah.
In the original trilogy, you didn't get a ton of those. You got some. And in 1 and 2, you got some really good ones. But this one was like the coolest. It was like the longest, and there were 4 people that are all really cool, all duking it out. And yeah, it was cool. It's
But
about as
as
good
an
as it gets.
adult now, continue that. I want you to continue into it while you still have your
Well,
thoughts
yeah,
together. How did you did you find anything as an adult that, let's say, cinematically could have been a little bit tighter, that didn't work as an advantage towards that particular scene? Were there any pieces there that kind of stood off?
yeah. There's a question. I don't know if I don't. It is. It's good and bad having the parallel action. It's really cool flashing back and forth, but it also is kind of like it's a lot. You're like, oh my goodness, like there's so much going on right now. We're over here. So you do wonder if maybe you let those fights aerate a little bit more. Like, let's focus here and then focus there, if that would be more effective. Here's the thing. We just talked about Palpatine and how he could use like his force powers. He didn't really use it. See, against Yoda, I felt like we saw more of that. Him up top on the Senate chairs, like just chunking seats at him, laughing. That's what I would think Palpatine would want to do more often. That's where he's probably more at home, is like, let me throw. And then Yoda's responding. He's playing a little more defense, which makes sense. He's a Jedi. He's not typically the aggressor. Using force lightning versus like force shielding, that whole thing to me flows a lot better for Palpatine of his style of fighting, right? I didn't think about that at the time, but, when watching it, it's like, yeah, this is more what I expected. I'm floating up top, chunking stuff at you, lightning you. Like, yeah, we had a little bladed, skirmish, but that ain't my main style. Let's get into the force. With the Anakin Obi-Wan scene, first of all, him going and killing all the separatists, that scene really works for me. See, we just talked about how it didn't really work killing the kids. Yeah, I could see him killing all these evil people. He's been fighting them for, years. They're evil. They're bugs and weird droid people.
And they were really the leeches of the Republic. They weren't good guys.
No, and they had been his adversary for the last 2 movies and then the whole Clone Wars. So him going in there like, yeah. And then I could see how that would cement in his head, Palpatine's a good guy. Like, yeah, we're taking out these separatists who've been the bad people the entire time. Like, I could see that move. Like, the Jedi are always weak. They leave loose ends.
That's
Let me tie these up. So you start the scene off with that, right? You get the turn at the camera as the eyes starting to turn yellow. Really cool. That's fun, right? Then you get, Padme coming to save Anakin and try to convince him not to do it. Obi-Wan stowed away, which kind of pisses Anakin off. That makes sense. Dialogue aside, that makes sense. And then the exchange.
Oh, no. Talk about the dialogue. I want to hear about the dialogue.
So it's not the best. Okay, so I don't mind like Padme's pleading to Anakin. I think that makes a lot of sense. Him getting angry, he sees Obi-Wan, he feels betrayed. A mild force choke, after we've seen all the events, how he's continuing that downward spiral. I'm there. He doesn't like really choke her. It's almost like
lovers bickering. It's
exactly.
a smack. It's a force,
inappropriate.
Yeah,
inappropriate conduct for anyone. But we just saw him murder kids, so it's not that big of a leap to see him do this. Like, oh, I'm so angry, and he's continuing. The dark side's overtaking him, which means you give into your passion, at all times. Really, your impulse control is very minimal. Obi-Wan coming off very cool and very like out of the ship. I do love that scene where he comes out kind of like the calm, the heartbreak he's got to be going through in that moment. The Jedi are on the downturn. His friend, his Padawan is totally gone, and he just kind of comes strutting out just like with an air of confidence but disappointment. While Anakin is continuing to get more rage-filled, more angry, more divisive. I think the dialogue there is less effective than the body language. And so when he talks about, they start talking about really on the nose dialogue, which is kind of like, you've turned her against me. Okay, that's fine. He says, only the Sith deal in absolutes, kind of the famous meme one, because it's a bad line. It's just not very good because that's an absolute statement. Only the Sith deal in absolutes is an absolute statement. Like, it doesn't, it's like, we don't need it. Like, that's just a weird line. You could say you sound like a Sith, right? Or that you sound like a true Sith. Something. I mean, an easy fix. Like, you truly are lost, Anakin. Anything like that would just be an easier. It's like he overthought the dialogue a little bit. Like, these are 2 longtime friends. You don't need to say a lot. And so I think the dialogue there is a lot less impactful than just the score and the body language between the two, where Obi-Wan's kind of circling him very calm, like, Anakin, what are you doing here? And Anakin's like, oh, I'm bringing peace to the galaxy. I'm saving. He doesn't say I'm saving Padme, but I think that would have been a good thing to say. But I think really they're kind of circling the kind of body cues, the kind of emotional, almost immaturity of Anakin and Obi-Wan, who does get upset, for democracy. He kind of yells at him, but throughout seemed a little more in control of his feelings. I thought was a really good dynamic of the dark side versus the light. And so that to me works a lot better than the dialogue itself, which is it's fine, but it's a little memeable. It's a little memeable to me. The lines are just a little bit clunky. They're just a little clunky. I feel bad for the actors because it's like these feel so written. They feel so written, like you wrote them down, and then when you say them as a human, you're like, okay, well, this sounds better on paper. You know, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy. It's like, well, no, duh. Like, we don't need you to spell it out for me. Be like, I wish Anakin would have made more of a pleading to Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Like, you're here, but you have to join me. You have to see this is the way. And Obi-Wan's like, no, what are you talking about, Anakin? You've given up everything you want. And he's like, no, I've brought in peace. I just killed the Separatists. I'm going to learn power to save Padme. This is the best option. And, Obi-Wan be like, Anakin, you're totally lost. The dark side is manipulating your mind. Like, that's a more realistic conversation. Instead, it feels like very robotic to me. So that's how I feel about the dialogue in that scene. I'm not sure if you disagree with me, but that's how I feel. I know, for example, you didn't mind the dialogue.
I disagree.
Okay, hit me with it. Hit me with it.
I feel like disagreeing with you. So let's do this. And again, we'll come back to your analyses of it. We can talk about it as much as you have time. But I did feel indeed that it was a very, very epic parallel action scene. I don't have a problem with them cutting back and forth because I think it works. It was
done well.
Yeah, it's done well. It's visually well done. The cunning is right. The pacing is right.
Agreed.
It's a concert of things that work together. Music, choreography, everything, visuals. So there's a couple of things happening there. Post that very, very sour scene with Palpatine's arrest, we now come to this. I do agree with you that how the battle begins between Yoda and the Emperor is a lot more effective than the fight versus Dooku. And they're finally both using their Jedi powers. I was a little bit bummed that the Red Guard never got used. They're like, get the hell out of here. At least they do something in The Last Jedi.
They do.
They do some fancy stuff. Here is like, nobody. Me as a kid, seeing those bodyguards by the Emperor's side, I'm like, they're the coolest thing ever. They're like the Boba Fett of the Empire.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. Anyway, I found it very interesting that he employed visual storytelling in the middle of a combat scene where they're in the middle of Senate and he's throwing these, and what's funny? When I was seeing it in theaters, I didn't analyze it. I didn't interpret it that way. I just subconsciously liked something about it. And later on, the next week, when I went back to school, I was at School of Visual Arts. I was already studying animation. It was, I believe, my second year in school. And there were kids standing in the hallway and talking about that scene. And he's like, oh man, I can't believe it. George Lucas is a genius. And I'm like over here, and I'm like, huh, genius? Prequels, really? I was kind of like with the cynicism. And then they're unwrapping that. And I'm unintentionally listening into that conversation and saying, oh man, all that visual choreography and how he's telling us that, that Yoda doesn't toss aside those pods. He tries to save them and put them back because to him, democracy is important. The freedom is important. While, the Emperor discards them because that's who he is. Exactly. It's a very character-driven scene, and it's also an action scene, which makes it a lot more impressive. And for me, who's somebody who struggled with other duels in that trilogy, it was fun to watch the exchange of force powers. I was like, yes, this is what I want these guys to do. Agreed. It's a lot more in line with what's agreeable with me personally. From my own bias, I like that. And when it cuts to Anakin now, first of all, the entire Mustafar scene is driven by this huge mounting tension. And it's, I think, what punctuates that scene is the silent moment between Anakin and Padme when he's crying. When he's about to go and apprehend Palpatine, remember that the quiet moment? I felt it's such a powerful scene. I think there's a rumor going around that actually Steven Spielberg directed it. I'm not sure to which extent it's true. Yeah, I've overheard it somewhere. But anyway, that scene leads into the duel. Yep. And when Obi-Wan when Padme lands, I love the exchange. I think it's some of the most emotional scenes in that trilogy. She says, "Look, Anakin, come."
I do like her parts, yeah.
Right. She sees that he's broken. She understands that there's a lot work to be done for him to ever be redeemed. But she's still hopeful because that's the female nature. That's the woman's nature. She's love. She's the one who gives birth to life to his future children. That's what women do. They create. It's the male half that is always demonstrated in the classical myth as a destructive power. And the exchange was nice. And then when Obi-Wan Kenobi comes out, I didn't understand it then, and I don't understand it today why those lines qualify as cheesy. I really don't. Because I seem to read a lot of like in and outside of Star Wars. I think I have a pretty good grasp of what prose is. And yes, I agree with you. It is not believable conversation in our modern day kind of speech pattern. But it's not what that film is portraying. It's a fairy tale. And I grew up watching a lot of European fairy tale films, and Russian ones, with Medieval Knights and the good swordsman in shiny white armor, trying to save the princess. And that's what's happening there. That's the kind of dialogue that fits that kind of style of filmmaking. And a lot of people critique him. Well, Lucas is so out of sync with his writing. Yeah, but he's inspired by the pulpy era of films that he clearly, calls back to. And he says, this is the kind of movies I always wanted to make. Growing up as a kid, he's inspired by something else. That worked for me. Obi-Wan and him exchange. And the first half of that battle is on the money, dude. He's like, pam, 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 pam. Anakin is going on the offensive. Obi-Wan Kenobi is going on the defensive. He's telling us a story here. It is not just cool factor thing happening there. But unfortunately, the longer that duel extends, the more it overstays its welcome. It's like 300. When you see those slow-mo battles for the first 10 minutes, it's amazing. It blows your mind. But after that point, you need to cut it. And by the time they get into that same chamber where Anakin kills off all of those separatists, remember? Where the Darth Star planet is, and they start leaping from table to table doing that crazy stuff. I'm like, it's a little too much here now. And then it cut away yet again to that platform, and they are about to collapse into the lava stream. With that little physical struggle, I really enjoyed that because there's powerful music, there's beautiful background of Mustafar, lava pit exploding, gushing out, and it amplifies, obviously, the emotion. He's using picture to convey feeling. Very powerful stuff. And then there is wine swinging. There's like Tarzan shit happening there. I'm like, come on, dude, what are you doing here? You have already demonstrated their powers. And I think this is a perfect instance of an artist being so in love with his own painting that he works it to death. He works it to a point where he rubs a hole in the canvas. And that's, I feel, is the instant with that particular moment in that duel where he goes, like, upping the ante is not the point. The reason that all of the 3 Chris Nolan Batman films work is that because they are stylistically different films. Here, I felt that trying to build it to the absolute maximum top didn't quite work for me. And their whole ride through the lava stream, I'm like, that's not necessary. But once again, when we come to that point where he's like, don't try it, Anakin. I have the high ground. I'm fine with that scene to this day.
I am too. I like that.
Dude,
I'm fine with that one too.
Yeah, I read Sun Tzu. I understand the art of war and the strategy of war. It's a legit line. I don't want to hear about it. And, Anakin jumps. And what follows to me is one of the most powerful scenes in Star Wars.
It is, yes.
Yeah, and I say it as the original trilogy fan. It is, and what really, really upset me was like, man, why couldn't we have the entire film when it feels like watching Ewan McGregor delivers those lines and get hurt? I felt hurt. I'm like, oh man. First of all, I was shocked. As a 20-plus-year-old, I'm watching that film. And we see a PG-13 movie with this young man being torched alive.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second. What is the rating on this film? This is dark freaking stuff happening.
It was dark.
It was so striking. It was so effective. It was so powerful. And again, I walked away. The credits rolled. We talked about briefly about that little conclusion that didn't need to be there, like tying the loose ends. Yeah. But after the credits rolled and I left the theater, I was genuinely satisfied. And I said, well, you know what? Screw my previous thoughts and feelings on the other 2 films. I love this movie. This movie is enjoyable. It's fun.
That's exactly how you leave that movie. And you watch it as well with like the Clone Wars season 7, where Ahsoka and Rex go down, and you see the clone troopers' helmets on stakes. The score is really good, and then Vader comes out, grabs her lightsaber. Like both of those moments to me are like some of like the most like powerful. Like when you leave, you're just like, it sticks with you for a day or two. It sticks with
Yeah.
you. You keep thinking about it, like, oh man, that emotional note that I hit. I think one good call out was that Obi-Wan and Padme scene leading up to the fight. I think the score that was also part of the Anakin's Dark Deeds
Yeah.
music. I love the score there. I like the sadness. I think Padme does look truly broken before the fight starts as well. Very scared, kind of like, hey, like, what are we doing here? Like
Yeah.
I'm not happy with this. I think she does a really good job in that.
Hmm.
I knew what you mean with the fight is long. It's a long fight.
Hmm.
It really is. It does keep extending to eventually lead to your I have the high ground. What's funny is if you watch I believe it's Revenge of the Sith game, they do an alternate scene where Anakin actually wins. You should go watch that scene if I can find
I
it.
bought the game on PS2
Yeah.
because I have a stupid habit of buying video games and never finishing them. So I just rebought it for my PS2 like a month ago. I'm going to finish it this time.
So in the end, one of the alternative end scenes is Anakin actually does the move he tried to do. And when you see what he was trying to execute, you're like, oh, like,
Really?
that makes sense. Yeah, I'll have to send you a link to it or you'll play it. It's like, oh, that makes sense. Like, that's what he was trying to move. Like, because he fails so horribly, you're kind of like, what was he trying to do? I think is what some people kind of meme that scene is they're like,
Yeah.
what was the plan? Like, I just jump up there. But when you actually see like, oh, he was trying to like do this spin thing that lands and, like, oh, that would have been pretty cool. And he landed it, but he was over arrogant. He was overconfident. That's it fits the dark side. It fits Anakin, fits why he fell. I agree. I love that. And that is the best scene in the movie, I think, is Anakin's and Obi-Wan's last conversation. And Anakin doesn't even like say anything, but I hate you, because he's burning to death. Like, and that makes sense. He's like shocked. Thinks he's probably dying at that moment. Fueled by rage, what the dark side is. It's kind of like Darth Maul apparently survived by being just so filled with rage. He literally sustained
and
life.
Hopeless, really. I really loved Hayden Christensen's delivery there. And I don't blame any of the parts where he doesn't stand out as an actor on him. I think it's directing, because you could see, I mean, he may not be an Oscar winner, and I don't believe any of the Star Wars films were written for Oscars. They're just different type of films. But dude, when you see an up close shot of Anakin and he says, "I hate you," and then you see that suffering in him, there's also like hopelessness and abandonment, and he reverts back to this child, because there's this concept of like breaking down the psychology of villains, is that partially what motivates them, what drives them, is childhood trauma. He reverts back to his childhood. I'm like, oh man.
And what I've heard about in that scene, and I've not validated this personally, so I might be talking, with fake news here, but in that scene, I think when he initially lands with the limbs cut off and you look at him, his eyes go back to blue. And then as he slowly starts to die and get angry, they revert back to yellow. And so I'll have to verify that myself. I don't know if that was intentional by George Lucas or a mess up in the FX, but it could have been very well like a last moment of humanity for Anakin of like, oh gosh. And then the eventual rage. Because I agree, that seems very effective. Obi-Wan's kind of like trying to tell him like, man, I loved you. You were my brother. This is what you're supposed to do. You were the chosen one. I don't understand what's going on right now. And Anakin is just like, like screaming, like, I'm in a lot of pain right now. I'm panicked. Like, I'm very angry. How could, I can't believe I did this.
Yeah.
I think that is a really effective scene. And then it, flashes back to Palpatine, who's like, I can't, he's like, I think Anakin's in trouble, like kind of like he can sense like, something's wrong here. I think that is a really the best scene in the movie. And I think without that scene, I don't think the fourth movie, A New Hope, is as effective when he talks about, Darth Vader is like, when Obi-Wan talked about the mean friends and talked about how, your father and I I think it enhances that scene. I think it really enhances the fourth movie. I think sometimes some people felt like, and maybe even yourself, the prequels undermine certain things about the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Like, well, now I don't like Palpatine as much. I do, but you don't. You're like, I don't like Palpatine as much. I liked him better as this like mysterious evil arc wizard.
Ancient,
I liked him. Yeah, I liked him as the young, likable guy. We're going to watch your career with great interest. I like that. But I think what it does enhance, I do think, is the Obi-Wan and Vader connection. I think it really does, like when they finally confront each other again, Kenobi seems at peace with it in the fourth movie. He seems kind of like, I've got your son, there's a hope here. And Vader still seems like, last time you saw me, I was a student. This time I'm the master. Kind of like, screw you. Like, I
Yeah.
lost that last time. But Kenobi doesn't seem there in his headspace. And so I think that scene really lends itself to the greater Star Wars universe as well.
Yeah. I think of all the inconsistencies, and we did speak about it. We talked about how there's a lot of differences of the Clone War and the young Anakin as the pilot when Obi-Wan Kenobi first meets him. It's very, very different from episode 4 to prequels. But I agree. I think that particular scene of the final outcome of that match where Anakin loses, it enhances the original material. Just like the Rogue One Vader, even though, like we talked about, it started as pornography, but Vader is just there to please the fans, but it's an effective scene. We all love it, whatever. Things that don't always need to be thematic or cerebral. Sometimes we just want to see cool stuff on the screen, but it also amps up that pursuit because the original film throws you in the heat of action in the story. Yep. And a lot of people actually, I talked to a gentleman who was like an original 77 fan. He said, I was confused as a kid. Yeah. I didn't understand what's happening. Like okay, these guys are running from these guys. Well, you know where it's coming from, Rogue One. And here also Vader's defeat. Now when he talks about, I am the master now.
Yes.
All of that arrogance, all of that pomp, and Kenobi's kind of like detachment from that. Like, no, I have already fulfilled my mission. Exactly. I stopped you once. I don't need to do that again. I just need to let my friends escape.
Last thing I want to say, because I know we're long on time here.
We are, yeah. We need to start wrapping up.
Kenobi versus Vader. Is it going to happen in the Kenobi show again? Are they going to fight again in the show?
Very interesting questions. I hope it doesn't happen in real time because it would basically effectively do what the Marvel comics are doing right now. And they're slowly devaluing the first meeting between Luke Skywalker and Vader, where in the comics, they meet 25,000 times, they cross swords, they battle each other, and he already knows that's his. I'm like, no, that just doesn't work. Stop going that route. And I don't feel that portraying Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Vader again does service to either character, and it doesn't make any sense. If we have that indeed, I'm going to look at it and say, well, okay, this looks cool. I'll still eat it. If it's well done.
If it's a good scene, yeah.
Right, if it's a good scene, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not going to front. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of Luke returning in the Mando season, but I did like it visually.
Yeah, it's cool.
But cool. I don't think it needs to happen in real time. If it happens as a dream, if it happens as a sequence that kind of like prepares us for what we're going to see in episode 4, I'm all down for it. What about you?
Execution matters. Just see how they execute it. Yeah. One thing I often say, and we'll wrap it up here, is like you don't want to let everything be defined by one line. So when Vader says, last time we met, I was I'm now the master, you're the apprentice. Okay, so does that one line mean they never saw each other again over that period of time? I don't know. I don't know. He could have said that, like, it's hard. George wrote that line not knowing what he was going to do and all that time before. So I do want people to be careful. Like, Mundi says in is it Attack of the Clones or Phantom Menace? Excuse me. He says the Sith have been gone for a millennia. Like, they haven't been here for 1,000 years. Oh my, okay. Well, the Sith clearly were there. Okay, we know Plagueis was there. So, like, just because you say that one line where the Jedi are like, well, they haven't been here 1,000 years, does that mean we never see the Sith again before then? I don't. To me, it's kind of like sometimes you put a line in where you're trying to express something. Vader and Obi-Wan have a history. And it seems that he was the Padawan to Obi-Wan's master. And that's what I'm trying to convey in this line. It's a great line. What does that mean? They never saw each other again. They fought on Mustafar and never crossed paths ever again. I don't know. Like, maybe if it's done well. I have a feeling it's going to be more of like Vader's going to be on the outside. And it might be a scene where even they're in a similar place at the same time and they sense each other. But I don't think they're going to do direct conflict. I don't. If they do, and it looks really good and it's well choreographed, it's effective, I mean, I'm not going to complain. If it's done bad, then I'll complain, but I'll give everything a shot. I'm not that picky. I like giving things a try. So,
Josh, thank you so much. This was like the dopest podcast we've done so far because you are so passionate. I'm so passionate. Please remind all the fans where they can come check out your channel. And I personally strongly recommend you guys do, because I love how Josh talks about new Star Wars, old Star Wars, And the stuff that he's touching now, like the High Republic, he really puts his time into it. And I encourage everybody to watch it.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, you can follow me at my channel, Star Wars Timeline. Follow me on Twitter. Come to our Thursday streams where Timeline and I talk about its current stuff. So we don't do old stuff. We talk about what happened this week in Star Wars, whether that's news or video games or comics, and we just shoot the breeze with you guys. So if you have things you want to talk about with us, that's a good opportunity to catch up with us. That'll be on my channels Thursday at 7 or 8 Central, depending on the week. We'll let you guys know.
And we take quizzes.
Yeah, that was a good one. I thought that was fun.
Okay, guys, once again, you've been watching the Star Wars Timeline podcast. If you enjoyed this video, please support us both. Subscribe to this channel, subscribe to Star Wars on High, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.